Who stole the cookie off the counter? Sell out. Take a bow, sell out. Okay, everybody. So Harley and Lower.
Good afternoon. I'm glad to see you. We begin a new book today, Persuasion. Bob Gass and John Sider. Bob Gass was a colleague of mine. He was here at USC. John Sider was one of my graduate students. So I know both of these guys pretty well. If you've read chapter 1, you know that it ain't Cialdini. It's a traditional book. So you got to plow through it. It is perhaps, among all textbooks, the most complete in terms of finding a reference for any term you can think of related to persuasion. Look in the index, you'll find it. It's very thorough. Anything. If you hear a term connected with persuasion, look it up in the index, it'll be there. I want you to think about chapter 1, not because of the content, but because it reflects an issue. Here's a quote that I took, and it's from the conclusion, but I put it up front, and I'm going to read it. And I highlighted certain points, and I want you to tell me what's going on. No matter how fervently some well-meaning people try to deny or wish the fact away, questions concerning control and influence will remain an integral aspect of humanity's daily communicative activities. Given the centrality of these questions, it seems both foolhardy and fruitless to assume that our understanding of human communication can go on advancing without continued research attention to the persuasion process. Thus, we conclude that the case for persuasion research is as strong today as it was a decade or a century ago. And there are headings in the chapter that are like, persuasion is our friend. Persuasion is not a dirty word. Why would they have headings like that? Why would they have a paragraph like this? What's going on here? What's going on here? Yes?
Is it an attempt to clarify the intentions as not immoral and not simply studying persuasion to get one over on people, but because it's important as human beings?
That's exactly right. They are cognizant of the idea, and though you may not be, many people think that those of us who are studying persuasion are immoral. We are just learning how to manipulate people. There are lots of people in communication who feel that way. They feel that the stuff that you are learning, we should not be spreading around because we're just teaching people how to manipulate others. That's what they're getting at here. That's what they're getting at here. And so they are cognizant of the fact that many people, including people in communication, don't like classes like this. They feel they should not be taught because they are just teaching people to be manipulators, sophists. And so they're trying to justify the study of persuasion. That's what's going on in this chapter. Okay, everybody got it? Okay, so when you read, like you see a sentence or a heading that goes, persuasion is not a dirty word, what the heck is that doing in a textbook as a heading? Now you know. Now you know. They are very conscious of people who oppose the kind of work that we are doing. One of the chapters of the book deals with defining persuasion. What kind of definition do you think Gas and Cider will offer? Look up at the board. What kind of definition are they going to give us? A narrow one or a very broad one? A very broad one. It will not be restricted to public speaking or political speaking or sales. It's going to be really broad. And the second point emphasizes that. It's hard to tell what is persuasion and what isn't. They take the view that almost everything is persuasion. Yeah. There are two goals, academic and applied. Learn about persuasion and hopefully become better at being a persuader. Academic and practical aims. Here, persuasion is not a dirty word. You might think, well, who said it was? Lots of people say it is. That's why they have that heading. There is a sinister side. It can be used for evil purposes. But anything can be used for evil purposes. An automobile, a knife, anything can be used for good or bad. By the way, sinister means evil, but if you know Latin, you know that sinister refers to what? Left-handed. And we don't trust left-handed people. That's the origin of that word, sinister. There is a good side and there's a bad side. Here's another one of those headings. Persuasion is our friend. I mean, you'd never have a heading like this in an academic book. Let's find out how you feel. Let's see who's here, and then I'll ask you a question. Okay. You know how you can get a UCLA student to go to the roof of a tavern? Tell him drinks are on the house. Everybody? Okay, I'll wait. Let me know when you're on. Okay? Not yet? Okay. Okay? Okay, I'm closing submissions. Let's see. Okay, almost all of you say almost everything can be a persuasion profession. Let's see how you feel about this one. Most people in these professions, are they respectable, disreputable, or a little bit of both? No right or wrong answer. Simply want to know how you feel. Okay. A little more than half. No, 54 rather, not percentage. 54 say borderline. Only one says they're all disreputable. Thank heavens, only one. Okay. For example, sales obviously is a persuasion profession. Do we feel that most salespeople are sort of borderline? Okay. Okay. Oh, let me go back. Let's try this one. Okay, 19 of you say yes, you definitely can. Almost that same number say yeah, you think you can come up with an example. And 54 of you, actually more than both categories combined, say no, every profession or career involves persuasion. Why doesn't come up with one of your examples of a profession that does not involve persuasion? Yes? Computer science. Anybody want to counter that? Do people in computer science never have to persuade anybody that their facts all speak for themselves? Yes?
To get a job in computer science, you need persuasion skills.
A little louder, please.
To get a job in that profession, you need some persuasion skills, as well as to interact with whoever you're working with. You need persuasion skills as well.
Okay. Anybody else? Computer science. No persuasion involved. Yes. Oh, well, let's stay with computer science. How do you convince people that you should work on a particular program as opposed to something else? Does that involve persuasion? Or does everybody automatically work on the same thing? I'm sorry?
That's not my field, but I meant like the actual job that they have to do. Is it
But I mean, the job is not just typing code. The job is deciding what you should work on, how you're going to interpret what you do. All of these aspects are part of that job. Okay, accounting. Okay. What about accounting? Anybody want to counter that? Yes, sir.
Probably have to convince someone that you should be their accountant.
Okay, you have to convince people. Anybody else? Yes.
You also need to convince people that your numbers are correct.
You have to convince people that your numbers are correct. You have to interpret the numbers. It's funny. I was watching Donald Trump's stop today. He's in Florida. And it's amazing. In spite of all the stuff that's been happening, he's drawing thousands of people, rabid fans. It's just unbelievable. And he looks at his debate and he says, it's clear that I won. You know, it's like, are you guys watching the same thing? And so, well, anything that you ask people to look at, they can come up with different interpretations. For example, right now, climate change. there are many people look at the data, they don't accept it. The data don't just speak automatically and convince people. There are many people who say, yes, we are experiencing climate change, but climate change is not due to the burning of fossil fuels. Climate change happens every so many centuries. The data do not just speak for themselves. So any kind of job that you can mention that just has, okay, data or facts, interpretations are necessary. Persuasion is necessary. Did I tell you about the study where the research assistant asked subjects who came in to describe a glass of water that was filled halfway? Did I tell you about that? No? Okay. Well, she simply had to record what people said and describe the kind of personality that they had. For example, the glass is half full. Ah, that's an optimist. The glass is half empty. That's a pessimist. But she then said, this person came in and said, you've got more glass than you need. And the professor said, oh, that's an engineer. He has no personality. Okay. Okay. Karen. The point the chapter is going to make is that it's pretty darn hard to name a profession or career that does not involve persuasion in some way. In some way. Okay. Write this down and we'll talk about this for just a second. This example here, an attractive woman drinking a new beer in a club. You may have seen the commercial where it's a crowded club. These guys are standing around waiting to order, and this very attractive woman comes in, and she walks up to the bartender, and the bartender goes, "Yes, ma'am." And she goes, "I'll have Disaronno on the rocks." Then they turn to the guys. Disaronno on the rocks. Persuasion. Persuasion. Okay, buzz marketing. What's the purpose of this section? Why is this even mentioned in the chapter? What's the point they're trying to make? You don't just read the stuff and just take it. You think about it. Why would they have this in here? What are they trying to tell us? Yes,
Persuasion is everywhere.
that's correct. We're not going to have a narrow view of persuasion. We're going to take a very broad view of persuasion. It ain't going to be the traditional public speaking kind of view. This is sort of foreshadowing that approach. Okay, very good. They're going to talk about how in various areas persuasion is necessary to convince people to act. In science, the global warming example that I gave you, the data is there, but people interpret the data differently. Some people will say there is global warming, some will deny it. And so you think that science and the data and the evidence would speak for itself. Not so. Not so. Not too many years ago, maybe up to about 15 years ago, the tobacco industry fought all of the data that said that smoking was unhealthy. They attacked the science. They attacked the science. They attacked the data. I've lived long enough so that I've seen patterns of resistance that companies or organizations might make when they're confronted with data that says that they're doing something wrong. I've seen this pattern many times. And let me give you an example, and you can watch for it. You can watch for it, and it takes years, actually. But the smoking situation. For many, many years, research has come out from the National Institutes of Health about the dangers of smoking, the health dangers of smoking, various health problems, cancer, heart problems, and so on. What does the industry do? The first line of attack the science, attack the science, attack the science, attack the validity and reliability of the science, attack the science. Until ultimately, the evidence is overpowering. But then they go to the second line of defense, and that is, if you ban tobacco, millions of people's careers and occupations will be lost. There will be big economic problems. You see this regarding coal and all these other industries. Big economic problems. With time, these people are retrained, they go into other professions so that the economic problem or argument cannot be used. The first, attack the science. Second, economic problems. And the final argument that resists change is, you're taking away our freedom. Sure, it's not healthy, but I can make up my own mind whether I want to smoke or not. This is the United States. You don't tell me what I can do. And if you follow public health kind of campaigns where they're trying to do things that are good for the general public, you'll find the professions follow that line of argument. They attack the science, they bring up the economic argument, and then they bring up the freedom argument. Very, very common. All right. Can you give me an example of where persuasion was necessary to answer an issue or a question or a problem in science? Yes.
Evolutionary biology?
Evolution, yes. And they're still arguing it, especially in the South. Yes.
This was way earlier, but like a geocentric to a heliocentric.
Say it again.
Like a geocentric to a heliocentric.
Oh, okay. All right. Yes. Now, how was that solved?
There was basically like a bunch of different what I like uses of the telescope that like proved that we were not at the center of the universe, rather the sun was.
They put Galileo away, didn't they? Yeah. And it took a long time because they had to convince the Catholic Church. And so they had to persuade the Catholic Church to change its views. And that required persuasion. Yes.
Genetically modified organisms and
Say it again.
GMOs, genetically modified organisms, and whether or not they're beneficial or detrimental.
Okay, yeah. Okay, good example. And then you'd have to argue one way or the other, wouldn't you? Yes. Okay. Yeah, you would think in science, wow, science is, quote, objective, and the data would speak for itself. Not necessarily so. Not necessarily so. All of you are experts in this. You can give me examples. I know. Can you give me an example of a film that has had a major impact on the culture? Yes.
Avatar, for example, James Cameron, because it made major advances in CGI, and they had to create a believable universe with like blue creatures climbing through a forest, but also harnessing human emotion to make all the characters come to life. That was a really big persuasion effort to get us to buy into the reality of Avatar.
I was thinking of an effect like changing our views toward global warming or things like that.
I think
That's
it may have done that too. It got a lot of people interested and passionate about climate change.
well, if you can demonstrate that, aside from just making that claim, maybe I think we can come up with examples that made major changes in the culture. Yes.
Like Food Inc. or Blackfish documentaries about like for instance, Blackfish is about the mistreatment of sea creatures like orcas in SeaWorld and dolphins and stuff. And following that, California's actually enacted laws about the way that you can handle those animals in those kind of places.
Okay. Documentaries such as those. Yes.
The film The Day After Tomorrow, and it prompted people to donate tons of money to efforts to stop climate change.
Oh, okay. All right, good. Yes, and your example, sir. Same example? Wow, that must have been a powerful film if both of you came up with the same example. And another one, yeah.
The Malcolm X movie, or like Super Size Me is another like documentary example.
Yes, yes. Yeah, you don't want to watch those documentaries about how they make hamburgers and things like that. You won't eat hamburgers anymore. Al Gore put out a documentary that had a big effect. Anybody know that documentary? Yes. What? Yes, An Inconvenient Truth. And what did that deal with? Global warming. And if you see the documentary, you'll see before pictures of the poles and current pictures of the poles with the glaciers melting rapidly. Very powerful. Yeah.
Also in PETA videos, they try, like for PetSmart, they film the background of how PetSmart treats their animals, and it does play with people's emotions. And a lot of people comment and they say like, okay, we're not gonna buy anything from PetSmart anymore. So that's kind of like a persuasion.
What goes on behind the scenes is not all that positive.
Yeah.
Okay. There was, all of you know about Nazi Germany, starting in 1937 with the Spanish Civil War. And then in 1939, Germany invaded Poland and World War II actually began. But there was a woman, a German woman, filmmaker, who created the Nazi propaganda films that showed the Nazis marching and showed the Nazi rallies and had the music that was so powerful. And she shot up so that all of the Nazi soldiers looked big and monstrous and strong. Very, very powerful. Anybody know this woman's name? Yes. Leni Riefenstahl. Leni Riefenstahl, yes. She was lucky she was not executed in World War II. The Allies allowed her to live, but they never allowed her to make films anymore. Yeah. Okay. They're giving you these examples simply to let you know that their view of persuasion is very broad. Very broad. When I see a bumper sticker that says, "Drive carefully, soccer mom," I feel like bumping the back of that van. Why is persuasion often very effective in interpersonal, face-to-face situations, social situations, family situations? Yes.
You trust people more when it's face to face and you're not as alert or expecting something to go wrong.
Okay, you trust people more. You don't expect people to be manipulating you. You don't expect your family members to be manipulating you. Yeah, we don't expect it. Yeah. Mm-hmm. You don't have as much time to consider something? Okay, all right. Mm-hmm. Yes.
Also, as opposed to like reading something, you can feed off of other context clues or like body language.
Uh-huh.
With someone face to face, because those are other persuasive tactics.
And so why is persuasion in face-to-face more effective then?
Well, I'm saying because there's more things to like look into as opposed to just reading it like on paper. Like you can read their body language.
Oh, I see. I see. So all of these cues operate collectively to influence the person. Whereas if you're just reading something, you don't pick up the nonverbal cues, for example, or the vocal cues. Okay. All right. Anybody else? Yeah, you know, let's say I have a friend of mine, and I say, I'll take your example. So I say to my friend, "Hey, what are you doing this weekend?" This indicates we're going to have some fun, right? Yeah. Hey, what you doing this weekend? And my friend goes, "Nothing." I say, "Good. I'm moving. Come over to my house at 8 o'clock on Saturday." Yeah. He didn't expect that from the cues that I gave off. Yeah. There's been research on the ability of people to detect if the person speaking to them is lying. And the people who do the poorest in picking out whether the person speaking to them is lying are married couples. Because they just assume that their spouse does not lie to them. And so they're not looking for any kind of cues, and so they don't pick up when a spouse is lying. Whereas with a stranger or with just an acquaintance, you're constantly alert. You're constantly alert. Okay. We're going to talk about the 4 functions of the study of persuasion. And I want all of you to pay attention because I'm going to ask you about them with top hat questions. And if you pay attention, everybody should get the correct answers. But if you're not paying attention, you will come up with the wrong answers. All you have to do is just pay attention, pull yourself away from the social website, and then you'll do well. And then you'll do well. We've already done this. I was reading an article not long ago about how in this country, as a whole, we spend many, many more times the amount of money on entertainment than we spend on education. People are much more willing to spend much more to be entertained than to be educated. Shows our high values. Okay. Here's the correct answer. Pay attention to this answer and the question. What function helps you become a more persuasive speaker? Instrumental. If anybody checked instrumental, they just were not paying attention. And the correct answer is knowledge. Now, if anybody checks instrumental or knowledge, you're just not paying attention. By the way, the answer to the previous question was defensive. Let's see if we possibly can get 100% on this one. Yeah, you might be pulling our leg. If you are, then that's okay. But if you were serious, yes. Okay. What? Oh, it is? For what, attendance? What are you talking about? The 4-digit code for what?
It's asking again for the code.
It is?
Yes, we can actually just ask it again.
It says it at the bottom right of the screen.
Here? Thank you for pointing that out. Has Top Hat done that before? Remember the little sign came up saying you were connected and not connected? Maybe when it was not connected, it sort of made you go through the thing again? Possibly. Okay. One of the reasons for studying persuasion and looking at research in persuasion is that most people have conceptions about parts of persuasion that they believe firmly are true. I think surveys say that something like, I don't know, almost 80% of the American population believes that subliminal persuasion is real. Well, you'll have a hard time finding solid research demonstrating it. But you can find lots of popular writing about it, anecdotal writing, but very little in terms of solid empirical research supporting the idea that subliminal messages persuade us. What we do know, and we'll look at this when we get to this section, is that subliminal messages may prime us to be open to certain kinds of messages, but the subliminal messages themselves do not produce behavioral changes. But most people think that they do. A second area. What is it about logical and emotional appeals that's wrong? Logical appeals, arguments, evidence. Emotional appeals, appeals to pity, threat appeals, humor appeals. We're going to look at all of these kinds of things. The idea of logical and emotional appeals goes back 3,000 years to ancient Greece, when people like Aristotle, in his rhetoric, told us that there are three ways in which we persuade people: logos, pathos, and ethos. Logical appeals, emotional appeals, and through credibility, what we call credibility. Logical appeals, inductive logic, deductive logic, the syllogism. Emotional appeals, such as threat appeals. Well, these categories, the distinction between a logical appeal and an emotional appeal, we just assume that they exist because we've been talking about them for several thousand years. We assume that there are logical appeals, and we assume that there are emotional appeals. And not only that, that we can recognize the difference between a logical and an emotional appeal. And the research indicates we cannot. And the way they tested this is to give people persuasive messages that go against what they believe, and ask people, is this message logical or not? When you hear a speech from someone who opposes what you believe, do you perceive that the arguments that are being made are logical? You'll say no. If the speech supports the point of view that you favor, and if you're asked, are the arguments in this speech logical? You go, yes, they are. Yes, they are. If you listen to Donald Trump and if you are opposing Donald Trump and you hear him make a presentation, will you say that his presentation is logical? You will not. If you ask Donald Trump supporters, is his presentation logical? They will say, darn right. So what this research tends to show is that what we perceive to be logical or emotional really comes down to the side that we favor. And we cannot objectively make a judgment. So those are two examples of areas in persuasion that most people have a feeling about, and they're probably incorrect. We stick with the categories of logical and emotional appeals, even though the research tells us that most people cannot distinguish clearly between what's logical and what's not, because we've been doing it for so long. There's been research on how the language you use in a message can convince people that the message is logical. If the message uses terms such as ergo, therefore, it follows from, use terms like that in the message, people will automatically assume that the message is logical, although the conclusions that are reached are incorrect. But it's the form that people use that lets people or gets people to believe that that message is logical, because they're using terms such as logic, therefore, it must be, it follows from. When you use terms like that, you get the idea that, oh, it must be logical, even though the content itself may not be. What is your book's answer to this? What is the answer that you would give if someone said, well, you're just learning how to be a manipulator by studying this stuff? How would you respond to that? Yes?
You're learning to respond to how to defend.
You also are learning how to defend. And the only way you can defend is if you know what the strategies are that are being used against you. Okay, that's good. Yeah.
Self-centered motive that has no direct correlation to persuasion. That's
Okay. There are motives beyond self-centered, interested kind of motives. We may want to help people out, help them live better lives, and so on. Okay. Yeah. It misconstrues the entire range of persuasive functions that exist. That's very good. Anybody else? How would you answer someone who criticizes you? They say, you're just learning to be a manipulator. Yes.
I mean, as we kind of discussed earlier in class, like you need persuasion almost to like just get a job or you decide what project you're going to work on. And so
I'm with you. I'm with you. Right. How are you going to get a job if you don't use persuasion?
yeah, you have to convince us they want to hire you.
Okay. All right. The book takes the view that it depends. What does that mean? It depends. Depends on what? Yes.
So it actually depends on the motive of the threat. So if you're trying to threat someone and prevent them from doing something bad, then it's ethical. But if you're threatening, just pure threatening people, and you're trying to like terrorism, and then it's unethical.
Okay, very good. That's exactly what the text says. It depends on the motive of the speaker. If the motive of the speaker is to use fear appeal, to get people to diet, to get a health exam, to clean up all of the dry shrubs around your home so that your home doesn't catch fire, to get you to save water, then the use of fear appeals is good. But if you are using fear appeal to get that person to give you all of her money and cheat her out of it, then that's bad. And so their answer is all of these tools, all of these appeals that we can make can be used for good or bad purposes, good or bad motives. And if the motive or aim is good, then an appeal can be used. If the aim or motive is a bad motive, is an evil motive, then you should not use that appeal for that motive. Yes, sir?
But doesn't the definition of what's ethical and what's unethical also vary according to
Can you give an example?
Donald Trump right now, as you said yourself, say he's using fear mongering as a tactic to influence people to vote for him. But people who support him might not think that that's unethical. But people who don't might think that that's unethical.
Okay. All right. I think you make a good point there. All right. Anybody else? Okay. This is the textbook's view. you'll find research has produced inconsistent findings. And so people might criticize the research because not all of the findings are consistent with one another. So what's the counter to that? It means it's complex. And the reason why this variable seems to have produced this effect in this situation and produced a different effect in another situation is that when this variable is combined with other variables, it'll produce a different kind of effect. And we simply have to study more because it's more complex than we thought. And so when you find inconsistent findings, you have to probe into the causes of these inconsistent findings. And we do know that there are certain relationships that are pretty darn strong. This last point, that there are other ways of learning about persuasion aside from studying what we study in this class. What might be some other ways? Yes. Okay. Practice yourself. All right. Any other way? Yes.
Through ethnography.
What?
Through ethnography.
And how would that help us?
By placing yourself in companies and observing how persuasion works.
Okay.
Better able to understand.
Sure. Get an internship in an advertising agency, in a public relations firm. Find out what they actually do, how they go about persuading people. Sure. You don't learn about persuasion only by studying it in a book. Okay. Any comments or questions? All right, we will go to chapter 2 on Thursday. I will see you then.